Thank you, Kathy. Let's share a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Superheroes have been around a long time, and I will kind of period piece my experience of superheroes. As a kid growing up, cartoons you could kind of capture on Saturday morning. That was kind of like the cartoon time was Saturday morning. And one of the ones we watched was simply called the Super Friends. And you were kind of exposed to all kinds of superheroes working together to combat evil and justice in the world. So there was part of my experience of superheroes of Saturday morning watching the Super Friends. Then I would get home from school, and from about 3 to 5, you could get cartoons of various kinds or shows. And one of my favorites was the kind of, wasn't really an anime, it was a real person Batman show with Adam West. Some of you know that particular version of Batman. And it had the pow and the wham showed up on the screen, and I love that. And then I had the Linda Carter version of Wonder Woman, and I loved watching her kind of ride in this invisible plane. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, that this woman was riding this invisible plane, that somehow no one saw her, but we saw her, but not the plane. And some of these superheroes we saw, I thought that was just my experience in the 70s and 80s. And the more modern version that our young people get today, you get all those just fantastic films that are out and all the special effects and all the things that are out there that are happening today, and that superheroes kind of gets regenerated one generation after another, that the power of superheroes travels from one generation to the next. And there's something powerful about the theme of superheroes carrying forward from one generation to the next. We think, well, they're just characters. They're just kind of made up believe kind of people to kind of watch. They're people to admire. But there's something about underneath the superheroes, kind of the themes of these are people that genuinely care about other people. I mean, the origins of, if you were to kind of look up the history of every single superhero, how they kind of came into being, you think of Batman, and Batman's origin came out of a vigilante that kills his parents. Or you think Captain America, who was the person that just wanted to serve his country, but he was too small and too weak and not qualified enough to serve his country. I mean, all these people are people that feel like there's some pain or hardship or difficulty that's come upon their life, and in superhero world, something happens to them that allows them to have some kind of power or ability that allows them to do things that no one else can do. Captain America gets this special serum injected into his body, and this small, weak boy becomes big and strong and accomplishes great things. It's kind of interesting how, like, as a kid, we want to be able to do remarkable things in the world, and superheroes kind of gives us imagination that if I have a little bit of strength and a little bit of courage and a little bit of this, then I can accomplish great things in the world. It's no wonder that little kids get wrapped up in the stories of superheroes. But the fascinating thing about superheroes is that the original writings of the superheroes in comic books was actually more for adults than it was for kids. In our day and time with social media and internet and movies, back in the early part of the 20th century, writing was the modern day social media. The modern day TV was writings and books and short stories, and would become comic books, would become significant. It's interesting to trace back the origins not only of how superheroes were formed, but when their identities were birthed into literature. Superman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, some of these characters all formed around 1939, 1940. When you start associating the dates of the formations of those superheroes in comic books, you would quickly find they paralleled the very beginning of World War II. It's interesting that these particular characters had something to say about the social dynamics, what was happening on the global scene with the World War. It was understood, at least in statistics, that in the early 1940s, just Superman and Captain America comic books were selling at 1 million a month in the early 1940s. 1 million comic books a month just with Captain America and Superman alone. That 44% of those that were serving in the military were reading comic books. And more often than not, when military received care packages from home, it was filled with comic books in them. Another fascinating statistic about comic books and superheroes in World War II, I thought this was a fascinating statistic. There is a particular comic book on the cover that Captain America has just hit in the face Hitler. Okay? Now, the fascinating thing about that is that was 9 months before the United States entered into World War II, 9 months before Pearl Harbor. The other kind of cool, fascinating thing about all these characters I've mentioned is almost all those superheroes were created by Jewish authors. Most of the superheroes were created by Jewish authors to tell the tale of what they were experiencing in Europe and inviting people to say there are villains, there are significant threats to our identity. We want you to know about them. When Captain America hit Hitler in the face on that cover, it was that particular cover that the Nazis put out death threats on the origins of those particular comic book writers. There was so much of a social backlash from that, from the Germans, but they continued to write their stories. They continued to tell their stories through comics and through superheroes. It's just fascinating to think, well, it's just kind of a fun story, right? But there's so much underneath that story that shapes how we think about compassion and justice in the world. Superman, the very identity of Superman is the story of a Jewish person, essentially the allegory of a Jewish person that's cast out from his home and has to reintegrate in a whole new society and what that means. It's powerful when you begin to overlay not only the stories themselves, but the history and the underpinnings of how those stories were formed and what they have to teach us. Stories are just stories, right? There's really nothing about the history of stories. I mean, Kathy told us a wonderful story of the parable of the Good Samaritan, probably the most known parable of Jesus of all the parables. It's just a story, right? Just about a story about Jesus trying to tell people about be good in the world. We know that Jesus came from a time period where he was kind of reared in Galilee. And between Galilee and Judea, right in the middle of that area is Samaria. And Samaria was kind of thought of as kind of like the Badlands. You don't want to be around the Samaritans. It's interesting that Jesus tells a story about what it means to be a neighbor. He tells the story, and instead of just saying, well, a neighbor is this, I mean, our logic side of our brain says, well, just give me the definition and I'll be on my way. Just tell me the definition, neighbor. That's all I need to know, Jesus, and I'll go and do my thing. Well, Jesus' way of communicating was stories. And he tells the story of a person that was robbed and beaten, and there was an opportunity for several to take care of this person that's wounded and on the side of the road, and there's some that choose not to, maybe for purification reasons, or I'm just not going to get involved. I choose not to be involved in whatever is going on, whatever drama is happening on the side of the road. That's for someone else to take care of. But there is one person, and we all know the person in the text. It's the Samaritan, kind of the outsider that says, I see you. There's something about walking by, not giving eye contact. Something about eye contact changes the dynamic of the relationship. When someone walks by on the other side, I'm just going to carry on, do my thing. You're not paying attention down on the road to see who's there. It changes. But if I'm looking down and I see that person and they make eye contact with me and then I walk away, that's a totally different situation than if you didn't give them eye contact to begin with. The Samaritan sees the person on the side of the road, says, that person needs help. They need assistance. And they go and make sure that person is cared for in a meaningful way. It's interesting, there's several characters in the film. We don't often talk about the innkeeper. The innkeeper could easily said, we're chock full, no vacancy, nobody can come in. But the innkeeper allows that wounded person to come in. And there's all these different characters in the story as Kathy retold that story to us this morning. And Jesus says, well, who's the neighbor in the story? And it almost begs the question. Jesus doesn't have to answer it. He actually ends up letting the listeners answer the question. They get to define neighbor. Jesus didn't have to do it. It comes out of their mouths and not his. And they say, well, the one who showed mercy. And almost a better translation of the word mercy in that situation in the Greek is actually compassion. The one who showed compassion. The one who cared. The one who chose to get involved. One of the things we like about superheroes, whether it's the Flash or Wonder Woman or whoever it might be, we like them because they chose to get involved. They chose to make an impact in the society of which they're a part. They chose to change the course of history. And more oftentimes than not, they didn't do it alone. They did it with others with them. And what does Jesus model? Not only in telling the stories of the truths of faith, he is bringing people together. He's drawing more people to him. By the time he gets to Jerusalem toward the end of his life, it's not just the disciples. There's women and families and others. My guess, there could have been 50 to 100 people that are kind of gathering with Jesus as he enters in Jerusalem for that final week of his life. It isn't just Jesus and 12 guys. It's men and women that have gathered, have been compelled to give their life to this person. And what words could we say that are embedded in this following of people as they make their way to Jerusalem? But it's compassion and justice. We see the opportunity for the world to be different because we see it in him. We can see it in us. Scholars tell us that this parable of the Good Samaritan isn't about defining neighbor as much as it is about being a neighbor. And one of the reasons Jesus tells a story as he does, he could have easily said, well, neighbor means this. He tells a story because it relates to action. It relates to involvement, engagement, participation in the process. Neighbor is not something we know. Neighbor is something that we are. And the other thing that he does in this story with neighbor, he kind of cracks open the whole definition of neighbor, because really what people were trying to figure out from Jesus is, who are the people I'm supposed to care for and who are the people I can ignore? We get to the end of the story and the listener has to say, the one who showed compassion. Oh, I have to care for this person and this person. I don't get to choose. Compassion isn't built in to say, I get to choose to help this person and not help this person. The power of superheroes. It didn't matter who it was that was hurting, who it was that needed help, who it was that needed a better life, who it was that needed a villain or some kind of evil presence to be squashed and eliminated in some way. It was about bringing justice and compassion so that all people had an opportunity, all people had a chance. And when superheroes banded together, in the Marvel world they were called the Avengers. In DC world they were called the Justice League. And when they banded together, they did more together than they would ever done alone. And when there's some evil villain out there that one superhero can't fight and seem to eliminate themselves, a group of them get together. And not only a group of superheroes get together, they get the people in those communities around them to help in the process. And the next thing we know is compassion's not being done by one person. It's not being done by two people. It's being done by a whole community. Maybe, just maybe, we could wear a secret garment everywhere we travel. I mean, I've always wanted to be somewhere and just kind of show my superhero little symbol, kind of take off my outer shirt and my inner shirt's got some superhero thing. I want you to pretend as though you've got one of these shirts on every day of your life. And you know that superhero qualities bedded deep within you, this ability for justice and compassion. And goodness knows we see plenty of people, plenty of circumstances, plenty of opportunities that need a superhero to step in. Jesus told a story in which the Samaritan did it. DC and Marvel tell it with superheroes. In church world, that's us. We're the superheroes. We're the Green Lanterns and the Wonder Womans and the Black Widows and the Green Lanterns and the Flashes and the Captain Marvels and the Captain Americas. And Jesus and God believe we have the capacity to bring about the compassion and justice the world so desperately seeks and wants. So put on your superhero shirts. Maybe in your own mind you can kind of do your little poses and kind of feel good a little bit, but we're not doing it to make ourselves feel good. We're doing it because we're doing it on behalf of a presence that compels us to respond to a world that simply wants peace and justice and kindness and compassion to win the day, in a world in which we see hurt and hate and injustice and meanness. We see it all out there, and we have a chance to respond. We can either walk along the side the other way, or we can look people in the eye and get involved. Compassion and justice. To me, it's the only way. And if that's the only way, then I guess that means we're all superheroes.